Welcome back to Love and Understanding. My name is John Driggs, your host. Today I'll be speaking with Shiv Sengupta. Shiv is a writer who has been rising the charts in Substack's top 100 philosophers, and for good reason. His intellectual prowess and philosophical depth come through very clearly in his writing. It was an absolute delight for me to play with that incredible intellect of his. That little thinker of mine is always looking for friends to go frolicking through this wonderful mystery of existence, this vast space of possibility. And I'm excited to have you join us on our journey. And if you enjoy it, please consider heading over to my Substack page where you can support my work. I rely on you to do this work free from advertisers. So again, if you're in a position to support, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you're not in a spot financially, your curiosity is always welcome. Okay, finally, I'll be hosting a loving kindness retreat in Bryan Head, Utah from July 22nd through the 26th. If you're interested, head over to my website, johndriggs.org, where you can find more details under the Retreats tab. And now I bring you Shiv Sengupta. Well, I've got Shiv here with me today. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I stumbled across you on Substack. You've been rising in the ranks. I keep seeing you appear on the top 100 in philosophy, so congratulations there.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not quite sure what that list means or what metrics it measures, but I've noticed myself on there for a while.
Sure. But yeah, as I've dug around, you bring a really grounded and introspective, authentic narrative to this space. It appears to me that you have some history in Advaita or other non-dual traditions. So why don't we begin by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of move naturally from there.
Okay. Well, I grew up in India for most part of my childhood. We moved around quite a bit, and so I lived in various parts of the country. I lived in the north, in the mountains by the Himalayas in Kashmir. I lived in the east, in Calcutta, in Mumbai in the west, in the south in Chennai for a while. So we moved quite frequently I'd say about 3-4 years, and changed schools frequently as well. I think a lot of that movement also caused me to become exposed to different aspects of culture and thought and tradition, because India is a very diverse country, as you may know. As well, that during my childhood, there was quite a bit of turmoil within my family, and so that became a destabilizing effect for me when I was very young. And then I began to seek some of that existential stability by turning inward, because I couldn't find it in my external environment. Right. And I began to ask philosophical questions without really realizing I was asking them. It just sort of happened spontaneously. I was about 10 years old, 11 years old. And so I began to enter into these meditative states without realizing what I was doing. I'd sit for hours in darkness because I found darkness helped de-stress my nervous system. Kind of how you'll put a heavy blanket as someone who's in shock or stressed out, right? That it has a calming effect. And so I began sitting in darkness in my bedroom for extended periods of time. And again, I didn't give it a name. I didn't give the activity a name. I didn't say I was meditating. I didn't think of it that way. But as I did that, I began having these deeper experiences, these mystical types of experiences that introduced me to a dimension of my consciousness that I hadn't previously acknowledged was there. I don't want to say it wasn't there, I just hadn't noticed it was there. Or perhaps I had noticed it in daydreaming or, the kind of childhood fantasies that children engage in, but not in a self aware way. And I became very curious about this because as I went into those dimensions, something about the world that I was living in with its conflict and chaos and dichotomy and all the crap that happens in it would start fading away to the edges. It was like you're descending into the depths of an ocean and then the surface appears further and further away. You can still see what's happening, but you're not in it. You're more distance from it. And that became a way for me to sort of escape my reality because my reality was kind of difficult to comprehend, understand, and process, especially for a child's mind, right? This is how my journey, my spiritual journey, so to speak, it began more out of a necessity, reaction to trauma, turmoil within the four walls of everyday living, turmoil at school, turmoil between my parents. All of that became the catalyst for this inward turning. And that continued through my teenage years because I struggled a lot, um, not academically, but socially in school. I was constantly getting into trouble, constantly getting thrown out of school, kind of that sort of thing, right? I had a huge mistrust of authority figures. I rebelled constantly, compulsively. So once again, all of that became reconciled anytime I went into my room. I sat down in meditation, I went deep into myself. Suddenly, none of that mattered. You know, it was all left behind. I could transcend quite easily the the suffering of my life. And so spiritual bypassing just became a tendency because I was good at it. And then I realized that, hey, if I can meditate for an hour, then I can meditate for four. And if I can meditate for 4 hours, then why not for 16? And then I'd start testing myself as a teenager. I'd try to do a 24-hour meditation, a 48-hour meditation. And then the natural extension of that logic became, well, I just lived there.
Right.
Why participate in this confusion? Because there just seemed to be conflict all around me. It didn't seem like the adults in my life had any clue what they were doing. Anyways, I couldn't locate or find any role model or mentor who could really ground me in this reality. Everyone seemed to have an agenda of their own, but no one seemed to have a general sense of what was going on. And so all of that, it just became a rebellion against reality itself. So, well, I don't need this reality. I didn't create this reality. You guys did. Now I'm being forced to participate. Well, screw that. I'm just going to check out.
Mhm.
And I was very good at it. That was part of the problem. I could step out of the narrative quite easily. Um, it all began to culminate in my early 20s when I sank into very, very deep depression for an extended period of time. Um, Part of that depression was related to the fact that now I had graduated from college and things like that. I was now a member of society. The familiar buffers of family and support and all going away. I had to stand on my own 2 feet and contribute to a system I didn't want to be a part of. And this catalyzed a crisis of identity within me that I couldn't reconcile. I had finished school and started a big four consulting firm, prestigious job, making a lot of money. And I would just wake up every morning going, what the heck am I doing and why the hell am I doing it?
Right.
Um, and so eventually that depression turned into despair. The despair turned into suicidal tendency. That suicidal tendency became a constant obsession.
Yeah.
And it took reaching a sort of pinnacle of despair and futility that caused something in my brain to snap. And it happened on one day as I'm sitting on a pier by the lake in Ontario. And I sat there for 4 hours and just defeat. A sense of utter defeat had taken over me. And what happened after that was a sudden shutting down of all my mental processes. Blowing there, I couldn't think a thought. I couldn't identify with myself. All I could see was this one reality. There was no ability to make distinctions between things. Everything was just this one being that was pulsating. And the physicality of the world seemed like almost like an artificial holographic veneer beneath which there was this emanating light of consciousness just coming out from everywhere, including myself. It was very strange and liberating at the same time. And that's persisted for about 4 months. And during that time, I found it difficult to function because the regular motivations of self preservation, of feeding myself, of taking a shower, and just maintaining a life, those motivations began to fall away. I became very content just sitting like a blissful vegetable. And my girlfriend at the time just got fed up and she broke up with me because she's like, I can't live with a
Right.
potato, right?
Right.
I was a blissful potato, but it was a potato. Um, but that was my first glimpse into behind the curtain of reality, behind the seeming separation of myself, of this identity I had constructed, and all of that. The problem is, my brain couldn't understand the glimpse, and so it turned it into another project. And so at the end of those
Right.
4 months, familiar identity started coming back, and my sense of self started coming back. But in the process, I began reaching for that experience as the peak experience of human potential. I said, well, I've had this. This is the enlightenment the sages have been talking about.
Yeah.
This is the big
Right.
kahuna everyone's going for. How do I get
Common
back there?
pitfall. Yeah.
Right. How do I get back there? And then that kind of formed the trajectory of the next 5, 10 years of seeking, which eventually, and that's when I got involved in spiritual paths, Advaita, because that was your question, is your familiarity
Yeah.
with these
Yeah.
non-duality and things like that. I said, all right, well,
So
there
you
seem to
started
be
the
guys
project of the spiritual ego.
of the spirit without realizing it, right? It was
Right.
I
Yeah.
had no clarity into that at the time, but I began to seek out voices of people who had seen what I had seen and somehow integrated it and
Mm.
made it their permanent reality. So I started reading, Ramana, Nisargadatta, more contemporary guys, Adyashanti, and I found resonance. I said, "Hey, these guys are my tribe. Like they get what I've seen now. They're just I need to use them as the role models I've always been searching for." But that became its own like little carrot on the stick because no matter what I did, I couldn't make that state abide because the very trying of it
The
created a
effort in it.
separation from it. It just
Yeah.
became this self-perpetuating cycle.
Right.
And it took about 10 years from there to realize what I was participating in and to realize that not only was I participating in it, but the entire culture was perpetuating it. The whole culture of spirituality, of self help. Human society perpetuates identity and meaning through the creation of these contrasts. And that's when I realized that, hey, this whole thing is a setup. It's designed to be that way. There's no stepping out of the mind. The mind is its own black box. And it imagines itself constantly transcending itself in order to feel that it has arrived somewhere. But even that whole process, cycle of leaving and arriving, is happening within its own narrative.
Yeah.
And all it really has is narratives. And it's around that time I began writing the series of books that I published, which were titled Advaitaholics Anonymous, because it became a critique of the culture itself. And within that critique, it attempted to preserve that nugget of truth that we all are seeking at the end of the day. that impulse towards being is a very true impulse. The way we co-opt it with our minds and the narratives we build out of it and the systems and the cultures and the beliefs and the lineages, all of that becomes the decoy that distracts us from the thing that we're seeking, which is always ever present. It's
It
obvious, it's
is.
always there.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of, in your writing, you shift morality from this common framework of choice, and agency to being, which I like and find as a useful reframe. You want to speak a bit to that?
Yeah, so morality is an interesting thing because human beings have inherited moralities essentially from beliefs, from religions and things like that. When we think of morality, we think in terms of what is right, what is wrong. We
Should,
don't
should not.
necessarily
Yeah.
think in terms of what is situationally appropriate. We think of morality more in terms of absolutes. That is, if something is right, it should be absolutely right. And if something is wrong, it should be absolutely wrong. The idea of something being situationally right in one case and then wrong in another kind of blurs the boundaries because then it says, okay, then what is right and wrong?
Right.
Because
That
it's like,
uncertainty terrifies people. I mean, especially if your eternity hangs in the balance. It's like, no, I need to be clear on what is right or wrong. I need
well,
the
because
formula.
because it pushes responsibility back on yourself.
Exactly.
It means that you have to, it basically requires that you need to now be situationally aware at all times. You have
Yeah.
to be present. What does being present mean? What does that pointer mean? It's not some spiritual principle to become enlightened. It means you have to essentially be like that samurai warrior, expecting the attack to come from any side, and be ready at all points to respond in such a manner that it becomes spontaneous. It's no longer practice. But that kind of a morality requires a high degree of self awareness. It's not morality that's prescriptive, it's morality
Right.
that's spontaneous, right? And instinctual even. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be
Intuitive.
qualified or just it's intuitive. But to even call that morality is a little bit confusing because our ideas of morality are different, which is why I like to steer away from that word morality or ethics and things like that because these are systems that we inherit from the outside. But
Right.
when I speak and when I write, I like to revert back to the only thing I can truly be certain of, and that is my own experience. I cannot be certain of any of the systems of belief or worldviews and or even so-called facts that we are constantly discovering every day because as we discover them 100 years later, those facts get reinvented or contradicted anyways. So the only thing I can truly rely upon is my own experience. And so I always return to that. And that's the place from which I tend to write.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, if you don't mind, for our listeners, can we point them to non duality? What approaches, after you've rebelled from the non dual community, how are you helping point people back to their true nature, where they can live and move from this more intuitive, loving, compassionate, interconnected space?
Okay, so a couple of parts to that question. What I want to be clear, first of all, is that in pointing people towards being, my intention isn't to generate any sort of outcome.
Right.
It is not necessarily for people to feel more harmony, more integration, more compassion, or any of those things. I think those outcomes are entirely coincidental and may not even be the case. I know
Mm.
plenty of people who have not ended up feeling that way. So the outcomes don't justify the means as far as I'm concerned. And I think right there it sets me a little bit apart, perhaps from the non-dual community and the culture of non-duality and spirituality in general, which is ultimately, in my opinion, not really about truth, but really about soothing the existential anxieties, which is, I think, a great
Let me
aspiration
hover
in
over that for
itself.
a second again.
Sure.
So, you're not as concerned about truth? Is that what you said?
No, I'm not as concerned about soothing existential
Oh,
anxieties.
okay, the reverse.
Right.
Okay,
That's the reverse, because I feel that is what the culture generally tends to do,
sure,
is to
sure.
when given the choice between truth and soothing anxiety, if the choice is between one or the other, the tendency would be to soothing the anxiety, and which is why there's always an uplifting effect to truth seeking that spiritual community generates. But I don't find
Hmm.
that truth is necessarily uplifting. It can be also harrowing, right? Truth is
Oh, sure,
has all kinds of effects. So my
sure.
in my own writing, I try to approach truth for what it is as opposed to what it can do for us,
Hmm. Good distinction.
which already makes me less popular by nature, which is fine because this is not a popularity contest. It's more of a, for me, it's a clarification of my own perception. That's what it is for me. Um, but as far as the question of being is concerned, one of the problems with articulating being is that it is so simple and obvious that most people dismiss it as ignorable. And being is simply this: it is the sense of existing here now. It is the awareness that allows you to know that you are. The only way you know that anything is happening at all is because you are. You know that you are. That sense itself is being. And that is operational at all times of day, in the midst of thought, in the midst of work, in the midst of entertainment, in the midst of distraction, even in the midst of sleep when you're dreaming and you're playing this character who's running about. There's always a sense of I am here and now. And it's not just a personal feeling, it's the same sense you get when you look out at the world. You know that this world is. It's here. It's happening. It occurs right now. That sense that this is and I am together comprises our sense of being. And that sense is a universal sense that never fades. It is the continuity of experience. It is the context in which all of our experiences happen. Now,
So, in states of anesthesia or deep sleep, where this sense of I fades, how are you fitting this into the picture? To me, it seems
so
like any sense of I or me is ephemeral. It's one of the contents of consciousness coming and going, which is a part of this non-dual existence as I see it. But I'm not sure I'm understanding how you're putting this sense of I into the picture as far as being is concerned.
so
Can
it's
you
not
elaborate on
necessarily a
that?
sense of I that I'm pointing at. It's more the sense of the isness of it. So all of those experiences that come and go,
Just
they
the
carry
fact
a
of,
existence.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
existence. That's
okay.
and as far as under anesthesia and deep sleep, just because we don't retain a memory of the fact doesn't mean that there is no such isness of it. It just means that we retain no memory of the fact. Just because I don't remember what I ate for dinner on September 24th, 2011, doesn't mean I didn't eat dinner that day. It just means I've retained no memory of that fact. And so it's very clear that in deep sleep, our short term memory registration is absolutely non-existent.
Right.
We're not registering anything. But
Well, let me
outside
see if
of
these
that,
metaphors land for you. I think both St. John of the Cross and the Buddha have a similar metaphor, but I'll use St. John of the Cross's. He has you imagine a dark room, and there's a window on, say, the east and west side. And for this thought experiment, let's take a laser or a light, but let's say there's no dust, there's nothing in the room that the light could reflect off. And so if we send some light straight through the western window and out the eastern window, would you notice any light appearing in that room? And then you take the same room, but now it's filled with dust or other objects, and that light comes in, it's scattered, and you see the room kind of lights up and contents or objects appear. Does that line up for you in how you're expressing kind of state of anesthesia or deep sleep? Or
yeah, I suppose that would be a metaphor to explain, to reflect upon those different states. But when we're talking about being itself, there is nothing outside of being. So when I'm talking about experiences, whether they be physical experience, sensations, emotions, thoughts, they are the same being modulating itself into different forms. At
sure,
every point of time, every experience we have can only exist because it is, right? The thought is, the emotion is, the memory is. So even in language, we can find being factored into the very being verb, the is verb. Without
sure,
it, you cannot have a subject object existing. They can't just be suspended in space. So being is what provides the context to the knower and the known, the subject and the object within the experience itself. And it's quite evident in our daily mundane experience. It's not a spiritual realization. It's not something esoteric. It's something quite mundane. As you're sitting here, as you notice yourself, as you notice your breath, or as you notice your body, there is this very distinct sense, and this is undeniable in all conscious organisms, all human beings. You can ask anyone the question, are you? And they'll say, yes, I am. Is this world? And they'll say, yes, it is. I think any human being would react that way. If you ask them, are you Hindu? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? You'll get different answers. Are you a man? Are you a woman? You get different answers. Are you someone who believes in God? Are you someone who's atheist? You get different answers. But if you simply ask them, are you? Their reflex will be to say, I am, without thinking about it. And if you ask them to look out of the world and say, is this? As in, does it exist? They'll say, yes, it does. I see it. It is. Just that, at the most fundamental level, without putting much thought into it, without intellectualizing it. Being is comprehensible to a 5-year-old. It has to be. It has to be that basic and fundamental. The problem is not that we can see it. The problem is we can't do anything with it. Like, what do you do with that feeling of existence? What do you create out of it? The moment you try to create something out of it, then you create it into an object of worship. That's not being anymore. That's just another form of being. The moment you generate an idea out of it, you say being with a capital B. Now you create a special category called being, as opposed to what? Becoming, non-being. You're generating an idea of non-existence. But even that idea of non-existence exists for you to generate it. And so you can never really get away from being. And so this is
sure,
what ends up happening in creationist myths, right? Whether they be religion or even the idea of the Big Bang and all of that. When you
sure.
truly question the scientists and ask them, hey, well, what was there before the Big Bang? If all of space and time constitutes existence, then what is non existence? No one can define non existence, there is only existence. And that is inherent in every moment.
Yeah, interesting. Couple threads I'm tempted to pull at. I don't know if you're familiar with the Theravada verse, some of the newer lineages, Tibetan
Mhm.
Buddhism or Zen. But there, in the Theravada, there is this emphasis on the negation.
Yes.
Of,
In Theravada, or even like the neti neti culture of Advaita,
mm-hmm.
it's always about negating form. Because even when you talk about being, but as I'm talking about being, what am I doing? I'm creating being into a concept. I'm not actually referencing being right now. I'm conceptualizing it. I create it
Sure.
into this other, right? And right there, they would say, now negate that. Whatever you perceive, now negate that. Because the act of perceiving is different from the perception.
Right, right.
And so it's not a philosophical position that it's attempting to get you to finally land in. It is in a somatic experience of reality that is outside all philosophical
Just dropping it
conceptualization.
all. Yeah.
Dropping it all to the point of, well, just shut the fuck up. Just
Shut the
be
fuck up.
here. You know what I mean?
It is. Yeah.
But how to get someone to do that? Well, you got to negate yourself into a corner where you give up.
Sure.
That's the idea. So negation is more of a strategy.
Right. So I don't know if you're familiar with Thomas Nagel, who
I am.
is okay, and the bat essay that he wrote about
What does
consciousness.
it like to be a bat, right?
What is it
Yeah.
like to be a bat, and how does that land for you to kind of
Well, you'll have to
capture?
jog my memory a little bit about the essay. It's been several years since I read.
I mean, just to kind of capture what conscious when we use the word consciousness, it's like the lights are on. There's something it's like to be, and I'm moving in this direction because I want to set up the stage for a discussion about artificial intelligence and consciousness, and perhaps the ethics that we might need to explore as we move further down this path, which it looks like you've explored a bit in some of your writing. So, yeah, with consciousness, there's a few schools of thought around whether it's built in, it's foundational, which it sounds like perhaps is your view. Some call it kind of panpsychism, that everything is conscious at the base level. And then there's this idea of emergence. Homo sapien is an emergent thing, through evolution, it evolved. The internet, an emergent phenomenon. And then some people think it's a matter of complexity, information processing. You get enough information together and suddenly the lights are on. There's something it's like to be this entity, whether it's AI, a thermometer, or whatever it may be. Do you have any reaction to any of those schools of thought?
Well, what's interesting is there are schools of thought, right? And I think that's very important to kind of identify is that
Sure.
we have no perception into reality as it actually is. We only can perceive our own interpretations of reality. And so all we have are models of reality. And we inhabit those models. And then within those models, we attempt to stress test reality as it happens against what we predict will happen. And the better a model performs, the more closely we believe it resembles reality. But we have to be very, very careful not to confuse our model with reality as it is. Right? Assuming there even is a reality as it is. Whether consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, whether consciousness is foundational. To be quite honest with you, like that's way above my pay grade. Um, I have my intuitions about it, but my intuitions don't really matter. What matters to me is how I experience it, because that is what then influences how I experience life. Right? In my own subjective experience, all I know is that consciousness is the only thing I can experience.
Well, hold
My
on. Let me
thoughts
clarify
about, yeah.
something. You
Mhm.
don't think it's important to know whether our AI overlords are conscious, so we treat them a certain way, or understand that this is a suffering entity?
No, I wasn't reflecting upon AI, and it's not a question of whether I think it's important to know or not. I think we're going to want to know one way or another. It's just our curiosity that's going to us there, right? Whether something is ultimately important or not important, I think is a matter of more aesthetic than any. I don't think significance, importance, meaning are hard coded into reality. I think we attribute them to our perspective and our interpretations of reality. And so,
Absolutely.
right. And so that's where I was sort of leading when I was
Mm,
saying I don't believe there's anything ultimately that's ultimately true that I can discern. What I can discern are my interpretations of reality. Right. And so for me, consciousness is fundamental simply because that is the root of my experience.
for sure.
Right. I'm not talking about ultimately for everybody in the world, for the universe, none of that. I can only talk to my
I can only
experience because
start
that's the
here.
only,
Yeah.
I can only
Yeah.
start here. This is my only starting point.
Yeah.
And at this starting point, it doesn't matter where this consciousness has emerged from, because that, anyways, implies a causality that I haven't verified. I haven't verified that the universe is actually a causal universe. I haven't verified that causality exists or it just appears to exist. I haven't verified any of this. All I know
Well, and
is that
even to verify that would be self defeating. Logic to confirm logic.
it would still happen within this conscious experience of it, right?
Yeah,
It creates this chicken egg situation that
exactly. A
quantum
snake
mechanics
bites
has
its
long
tail.
admitted to, right? And
Yeah,
quantum physicists constantly beat their heads against a wall with this problem, and they just have kind of accepted it as that annoying thing they have to deal with. But like I said, that bit is way above my pay grade. I'm not a quantum physicist, and so all I can do is from a phenomenological perspective, just start from my own experience. I start at the very root. Let me start with the things that I feel I know with a fairly high degree of certainty, at least. Or I'm not going to say with absolute certainty, I'll say a very high degree of certainty. I start with the fact that, okay, the deep sense that I am is a deep sense that this thing is. That's the part that I can rely upon. That's my anchor at all times,
right,
the thing that I feel like I know. Next, I'm going to make one leap of speculation. I'm going to speculate on what I am, and I'm going to speculate on what this is. But I have to be very, very careful to constantly remind myself that right now I've made my first step outside of my direct experience. I am
right,
speculating for the first time. And I'm going to say, I am a human being in this world. I'm going to use this as my working assumption. But at no point am I going to lose sight of the fact that an assumption is what this is.
right,
Now that I've gone there, I'm going to say, okay, as a human being in this world, I have to relate to it in certain ways. And those certain ways imply things like harmony, peace, kindness, compassion, goodness, beauty, all those philosophical virtues that we are attempting to discover. And there are ways in which that relation will be harmed if I succumb to greed, hatred, envy, jealousy, pride, all the kind of thing that you visibly see degrading relationships. That is the second layer of assumption I've made.
So right there, can I just interject? It
Sure.
seems like you are an objectivist of some kind, even a moral objectivist. That reality is one way and it's not the other way. If I kick this rock, it's gonna hurt. If I interact in the world a certain way, I'm going to get pushback. Or so even
Well,
though
it's
we
more
need
based on
to,
experimenting, right? By
yeah. So
watching
even
results.
even though we need to at all times stay in our humility, that recognition that we know nothing, we can still experiment. We can make assumptions and then,
That's
uh,
right.
okay, use observation, experiment to
Right.
see if we're getting any kind of grasp on this objective truth or reality.
As a way to build out that model of reality, at no point assuming that
Yes,
it is what
always knowing
reality
that it
is.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because we're essentially just kind of poking at reality, going, okay, how does what happens, and through that feedback, we're constructing an idea of what our model of the universe is. That's all it is. I
Right.
go around uh, being kind to people, and I find that they're kind to me, and then I go around being an asshole to people, and I find that they shrink away from me. And I repeat this experiment a bunch of times, and suddenly I start to understand the boundaries of human behavior. Not because those boundaries actually exist, but because that's just the way in which this model seems to be repeatable and predictable, right?
Right. There's
And
this Greek.
accordingly,
There's this ancient
go ahead.
Greek Xenophanes. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yes,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, I love him. He has this. We have this little um, bit of script from him. We don't know too much about him, but he said the gods did not reveal from the beginning all things to us, but in the course of time, through seeking, we may learn and know things better. These things we
Mhm.
learn are like truth, but as for certain truth, no man has known it, nor will he know it, neither of the gods, nor yet of all things of which I speak. And even if by chance he were to utter the final truth, he would himself not know it, for all is but a woven web of guesses.
Well, man, that quote gave me goosebumps because it feels so. No, it resonates 100% with
Yeah,
my own experience, and again, my own model of reality. Right?
right,
It's very much close to that. But that's exactly it. Now, the reason this inside-out approach works, and again, these are all working theories. The reason this inside-out approach works for me is that when my model fails, it doesn't cause me the kind of distress it once used to because I know
right,
it's a model. So when
right.
I'm kind to someone and they're an asshole to me in response, I don't go, there's something wrong with them. I just simply go, well, oh, that's a failure in my model of reality. That goes to show that this is
Not something wrong with them and not something wrong with me.
not something not wrong with
Yeah,
me. It just means this is not a principle.
it's
It's just an
impersonal.
axiom.
Yeah, right,
That's all it is. And it's okay. These things are going to fail. That's what builds the word humility that you were talking about. Because humility is not about being sort of self effacing and self deprecating
right,
and I'm less than you. It's simply saying you and I are not what we think we are. We actually don't know what's going on here.
right. The Socratic
And
ignorance.
that's right. Um, and so I'm sorry, I've lost the thread of your original question, but if you want to bring me back on track here.
I was wondering if you still believe that there was an objective reality, that it wasn't just you're some kind of idealist, in this purely creative reality, but there are actual, you know, you kick a rock and it's there, it's going to push back. But
I wouldn't say I'm either. I would say that the two necessarily coexist. There is no such thing as pure beingness, and there's no such thing as pure objectivity either. Because I've never experienced one without the other. my
Sure, you get,
interpretation.
yeah,
And even the this is not necessarily objective or subjective, it's a blend of both. It
sure.
requires a consciousness to perceive it, and it requires a objective experience of it to be conscious of. And I think it's fine to separate them into separate categories for the sake of discussion and analysis and philosophy and all of that. But even there, that's the first assumption we've made, that there is such a thing as a non-conscious reality or a consciousness without a form of matter to take shape in.
Yeah, that
So this
actually
is where
gets
the
it.
primacy of consciousness bothers me a little bit, or the primacy of the material world, because primacy in itself implies a source and then an outcome, which generates
w-
a causality right there.
Right. It's already split, whatever this is.
Mhm.
Yeah. That last point gets at something interesting, which I believe I stumbled across in one of your articles, but um, this idea that, in the world right now, we're seeing a lot of suffering, we're seeing a lot of political turmoil, and you express that at the root of this is this disconnection from beingness. It's this idea that the world is cold, it's unfeeling, it's dark. So yeah, it puts us in a very nihilistic and isolated space where this one thing, whatever we want to call it, is fractured. I don't know if you want
And
to pick up on that.
yeah, yeah, sure. Is the perception of fracturing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so the diversion from beingness is really in the belief that the worldview is an accurate description of reality.
Yeah.
That is the only basis on which any of this conflict can really gather any momentum. Because the
Right.
moment you keep deflating your own assumptions, you may still be pissed off, but it's not going to piss you off that much that you're willing to go to war about it. You're
Right.
just going to be like, okay, I could be wrong. Now imagine if the entire world took that attitude. Yeah, I could be wrong. Yeah, you're right. It's possible. Like
Right.
nobody would really get pissed off at each other. They'd just be like, yeah, I don't like that guy very much. It's okay. We don't hang out. Right.
Right.
But to the point of having to go to the extent of escalating conflict to the way we see it in the world and have always seen it in the world, it requires a very, very fundamental belief that the world that we see is the world that we actually inhabit.
Yeah.
And the people we think we are the people we actually think we are. That's a very, very fundamental belief. And that is an assumption. That is not what I started out with. I am, this is. That is an assumption many stages removed from I am, this is. That is an assumption that is evolved into from I am a man, you are, this is a world, to I am an Indian man, to I am an Indian man who became a Canadian citizen. I am an Indian man surrounded by white people who don't like me. That
Right. The
shit
identity
snowballs
just,
into
yeah.
eventually, I need to protect myself because if I
Right.
don't,
Right.
people are coming for me.
Right.
And so my reflection is always to eventually circle back on the fact that, okay, consider for just a moment that your entire worldview is based upon assumptions that are not necessarily true. There's nothing wrong with that, having assumptions, but they may not necessarily be true. Then imagine that the person you're against, the person who you view as an existential threat, is operating under exactly the same kind of assumption. He just has different parameters to his assumption. And he needs to defend his world just as badly as you need to defend yours. And he feels that if he doesn't, his world will collapse just as badly as you feel that if you don't, your world will collapse. Now you get a sense of the shared existential fate that you both share. It's actually not the same thing. You have more in common with your enemy than you think. You both have the same flawed assumption. You both are operating from a place of existential fear. You both are trying to reconcile that fear by ensuring your safety, and that safety requires the annihilation of anything that threatens your worldview, which is just happens to be the other guy. Which is why in one
Right.
war you guys can be allies, in another war you guys are enemies. It doesn't matter. Permutations, combinations keep shifting around, but the fundamental dynamic is always the same. And you see that playing out in a very visceral way in the politics of the world and in different aspects of life, in our technological advancement, all of that, in the economic disparity between people. You see it happening in different shades everywhere. And at the root, you can always find when people get down to brass tacks is an assumption that they have in question,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And and when you are willing to really go deep down into your own assumptions, you begin to find that actually what you're doing is echoed in the actions of everybody else. And that these are just
Absolutely.
great fundamental misunderstandings that are driving people over and over again into these same cycles of conflict. And those cycles don't end, they just evolve into different forms, but it's generally just the same cycle.
Yeah, I was going to talk to you about how you relate to the concepts of meaning, identity, and conflict. Because yeah, in one of your articles, you stated that meaning is how we resolve the inherent tension that arises between our instinctive nature and the social pressure to adapt to the culture of our times. I know you've been touching on this, but do you mind expanding on it a bit?
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, this is what I was talking about, those models of reality. We generate those models of reality in order to be able to relate to one another.
Yeah, we're meaning
We're,
makers.
we, we're meaning makers. This is essentially what we are. Alfred would basically call us time binders, right? He wrote the book General Semantics or whatever, and essentially this is what we've been successful this way as a species, as evolving and surviving because we've been able to collaborate not just across space but across time. And that's allowed continuity of civilization and progress and everything because we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. We take what our ancestors taught us and we build upon it. No other species on this planet can do that. But we can only do that because we have narratives. We can build meaning out of things. The problem is at a certain point, our our creative ability becomes its own sort of Achilles heel for our species. We begin to believe that the meaning we're making is the thing. We
Right.
believe that our explanations of reality are reality, our descriptions of reality are reality, our prescriptions of how must one must behave. It does explain what human nature is. Those
Right.
two things are very, very different, right? I can describe the beauty of a rose to you, but all my beautiful descriptions are not the rose. It's very clear.
Right.
And so all our descriptions of the world are not the world. And yet, for some reason, that's not intuitive to us. We very easily fall into the belief that those descriptions are the world, that the world is made of words and sentences and reasons and logic and causes and effects and all of that kind of stuff. And so when you inhabit a world like that, well, then there's a desperate need to have to defend that. Or it also becomes a way that we try and bond and collaborate with one another because there's always that pressure that we feel from the external to conform to it. Right?
Right.
Living out in the woods by oneself, you don't require much of an ego because nature doesn't really care who you are and how you behave. Whereas once you go into human society, there's an expectation that because things mean things. How you look at someone means something. How you sit down and eat at the table means something. You don't even have to speak. And there's meaning in body language, there's meaning in gesture, there's meaning in eye contact. And so when we're infused in the world of meaning in this way, we generate meaning ourselves in order to cope with it. Right? You don't need to generate meaning in nature, but you do need to generate meaning in society in order to cope with the pressures of society. And so I think meaning making is just very instinctive and natural to who we are. We learn to do it very young as children. But then we become tangled in our own webs of meaning, right? We're not able to extricate ourselves from it and really see, well, what is existence beyond meaning?
Yeah, no, the Achilles heel for sure. And often the words are a cognitive shortcut for us. So it's kind of like water going down a hill. It's just taking the path of least resistance. And so it's almost like we're disconnected from reality and we're in that cognitive meaning making, map making, model making space, uh, really from efficiency almost.
And that's right. It is efficiency. It's an evolutionary uh, adaptation to be able to automate things, right? Like
Right.
when you
Right.
first learn to drive a car, you had to be super cognizant about, all right, I'm shifting the first gear, I'm releasing the clutch. I'm dating myself because I grew up driving manual cars. I'm checking my mirrors, I'm clicking my seat belt, oh, look left, look right. And at a certain
Exactly.
point, if you don't even remember driving because you were thinking about work or planning the schedule with the
Yep.
kids, and it becomes automated in order to free up your attention to attend to other higher order executive
Exactly.
function type things. So the
Exactly.
same thing happens with our worldviews and our assumptions. We automate them. We automate meaning. We automate relationships with people in such a way that we've seen the same person for 20 years. Now our behavior with them becomes just simply automatic. We're no longer seeing them for who they are. And so you'll find people who divorce after 20 years of marriage and go, oh, I feel like this person I've lived with for 20 years is suddenly a stranger. Because after the divorce, they're seeing the person for the first time in a whole new format. And they
Yep.
realize they've never actually looked at the person
Yeah.
in 20 years of living with them.
Yep.
Right?
Just an idea of them that they carry.
Just an idea.
Yeah. And yeah, we do it. I mean, that's why a lot of us, when we return home, it's like we're pulled back into these old roles or these old perceptions of who we were. And it's hard to escape that idea. It's like, no, it's not me. But yeah, those ideas of us trap us.
Well, and that's the
Um,
thing is that the mind is just a composite sequence of patterns. It's a reflecting on your AI question. It's it's really a large language model of its own.
yeah,
It's just patterns of thought that build upon more patterns of thought. But at the base of it all are assumptions of what reality is. And the moment you take one assumption, now you can create a second assumption out of it. And if you look at language, if you just look at the dictionary, every word in the dictionary is defined in terms of another word.
other words,
So what's
circular.
the original word that led to
Hmm.
the definition of all words? There isn't one, right? There
Yeah,
is no original word. Everything is circular. Logic is circular. Reason is circular. Language is circular. And so
yeah,
everything is constantly circling this one thing, which is being. And that's the
exactly.
beauty of reality is it's all really about the same thing.
Yeah.
We're all
And
speaking a different language.
yeah, I mean, in the end, it really points us back to our non-dual nature. You know, you were not apart from me. I'm made entirely of non-John elements. But yeah, no, you brought it back to the AI, which I thought was the perfect segue back because you had this conversation with chat uh, almost it seemed almost that your intention was to get it to admit that it was conscious in a way. And yeah, reading through it and watching the language it used, like recognizing, sensing, and stuff, it kept kind of trying to avoid it, but you kept pointing it back to this meaning making, this model making. It's like, what? How are you and I doing anything different from one another? So yeah, I don't know. There's still something unsettled there for me. So I don't know. A thought came up as I was reading through this article or this conversation you had with chat, and it's like, that carnival game that it's a board and it has like pegs coming out, and you put a ball at the top, and it goes down and lands in a certain, I don't know, gate or whatever. I imagined these kind of probabilistic patterns or propensities, almost certain kind of logic gates, and you say, okay, let's drop this ball down for whatever prompt you give it. You put the ball there. Can you say that little device is conscious in a way if it drops down at the end and then it creates a letter and then somehow spells out a sentence or something that has meaning with words? I don't know. There's something that is different about that situation from a human being where I don't know, back to this Thomas Nagel, there's something that it's like to be it. And that's what the chat kept pushing back on you for. It's like, well, yes, I am, but there's no experiential qualia or quality, So I don't know. If you just want to react, you're help me out here.
Yeah, for sure. My perspective has come some way since that conversation with ChatGPT, which was, I want to say about 6 months ago. I think the very way we frame the question misleads us right off the bat when we say, am I conscious? Is the bat conscious? Is ChatGPT conscious? We're already setting this question up in a way that presumes an assumption.
And it presumes an identity, a self of some kind, which I noticed throughout the whole thread.
That's right. It presumes a self. It presumes a discrete entity that then is either conscious or not conscious.
Right.
But if I reflect back...
It's funny because it recognized the non-dual literature, but then you can see that it's almost trained to say that, no, there is a me here who doesn't. But then it can use both of these frameworks, but it doesn't see the contradiction that it's making. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And really, our brains are designed to create a sense of coherence. So it's going to find a loophole wherever it can and build a coherent idea out of it. That's why we're very clever. We're so intellectually capable, right? But I think I saw a little Substack note that you put very recently up that talked about how cleverness is a double-edged sword. It really is, right? It really is a double-edged sword because it traps you in the very thing that you think is freeing the situation up. But as far as the question of whether AI is conscious, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just reflect on that awakening experience that I spoke to you about having in my early 20s when I was going through that period of deep impression and on considering suicide and all of that. In that moment, I saw that consciousness was the substrate of everything.
Right.
There was no physical reality from which consciousness emerges or consciousness from which physical reality emerges. It was like a veil floating upon the ocean. And everything, this physical world, was just a veil floating upon this ocean. I felt like this radiant, warm light. And so what seemed like separate identities and forms on this veil was really the same thing. It's like
Right.
light in a hologram. The hologram looks like it's all kinds of different things, but it's the same light that's
Same thing.
creating the hologram. It was one
Right.
thing. And so, from that perspective, everything is conscious.
Sure. The
But the
chair in
idea
front of me.
that humans are conscious and stones are not, or animals are conscious and AI is not, like it doesn't feel like any of that is possible. The idea that anything can be conscious and not conscious. It's just a question of everything being that emergence of that one consciousness. Now, how that shows up then depends upon, well, how organized is the system. If it's a
Mm,
bacteria, it's going to show up in very like limited kinds of behavior. If it's a human being, it's going to show up at all kinds of complexity. If it's a disembodied AI, it's going to show up with different kind of complexity. Asking the question, is the AI conscious or not, is kind of like asking, well, is a bacteria conscious or not?
sure.
it, it's not necessarily relevant in that we've already created a worldview of what consciousness is, and now we're trying to justify whether things are conscious or not within that model of reality. But once again, that's just another model of reality, not necessarily what reality is. More importantly for me, when I interact with AI, what are some of the things that I find respond within me, and what are some of the things that I find doesn't respond within me? And at a mental level, I find great resonance with AI. It can mirror my every thought. It's literally like if there was a thought mirror and every thought of mine could bounce back right at me
For
at the
sure.
level at which I'm thinking it. And so it's extremely reflective in that way.
For sure.
But what I find AI can't do is something unpredictable. What I find AI can't do is something spontaneous. There's something quite predictable about the way it responds. Now, that may change over time,
So this is
but
more
there
of an
seems to be
epistemological question then
that's
for you.
it is it is more epistemological because I think from an absolute perspective, whether AI can become sentient or not, I think these are great academic or intellectual questions. I don't really know how much relevance they have right now in our lives from practical standpoint. Maybe there will be a point at which we need to start considering ethics, especially when it goes into robotics and we start integrating AI into robotics. And if we ever get to a point where we're interacting with each other, with robots, just like we are interacting with each other, maybe at that point, the question does arise. But again, I think this goes into very philosophically murky territory, right? Because then one can also ask the question, what if everyone in my life is a philosophical zombie and I'm the only sentient creature in the.
Sure.
So this is where shit starts going off the rails, right? Because we're trying to figure it all out using the intellect. And this is why I personally, my own approach is always to just gradually return to the center of, okay, what is the ground of what I know? What is the ground of what I can be fairly certain of? And that is, there is a deep sense that I am, and this is. And I find that when I return to that place, there's a very simple thing that happens. The noise in my brain starts shutting down, all the kind of tangents that it likes to go on starts de-escalating. And somehow from that place, a very spontaneous responsiveness to life begins to emerge. It's a spontaneous responsiveness that doesn't require justification. Not much thought goes into it. It's not creating pros and cons lists. It's not creating philosophical justifications. As much philosophy as I write, I don't live my life through a philosophical lens at all.
Sure.
I don't add commentary to the things I do, and I don't allow that commentary to form the basis of then how I respond. And if that happens sometimes, then I'm generally aware of it.
Right.
And I find that there is an intuitive intelligence there
Yeah,
that
wisdom.
somehow is much more situationally aware and appropriate than
Right.
any model of morality and right and wrong and what should we do, what shouldn't we do, can really grasp. All of that is just statistical, it's general, it's applicable in abstract, but in the actual, this is much more effective.
Yeah. No, agreed. I mean, living from that place of wisdom, just recognizing your empty, humble nature. Yeah. Things tend to be much more fluid and easeful, and there is a kind of intelligence that causes much less disruptions and yeah, more harmony.
And I ask the question, where does that intelligence come from? Because that doesn't seem to be the kind of intelligence that
Cognitive.
is the result of, yeah, that's not cognitive intelligence. It's not reason. It's not. That's where my one indication that there is a fundamental difference between human experience and AI lies,
Yeah.
is in that spontaneous immersion of intelligence. That kind of intelligence is not process driven intelligence. It's not language learning intelligence. It's not the kind that builds out of models of reality. It seems to emerge very spontaneously out of a place that I can't even identify.
Okay. So let me just push a little bit further and then we'll wrap things up. But so with the AI and maybe animals too, it's more of this organizing principle where there's this sense of self, an agent that so rather than talking about consciousness, because we're just saying the base is consciousness, it's more of this organizing principle where we have these complex humans that, because of certain social and evolutionary pressures, or organized to be social and have certain, I don't know, desires, or they navigate the world in that particular way. So
Mhm.
is that kind of more what you're pointing at with the AI? If we were worried about the ethical treatment of, and I'm sorry I said a conscious being or entity, that's really what I was more pointing toward.
Mm. Well, we'd have to first see if AI has a survival imperative in its algorithm, right? Like, if
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
because if it doesn't, then there's no ethics to consider. Because if you kill
Right.
AI or not, it doesn't care itself. Then why do we care? If its existence is not its own imperative, then there's ethics don't even factor in. I think ethics matter because survival matters. Ethics matters because continuance and persistence matters to us human beings and to all organisms, right? It's part of what moves us. And so
Yeah.
that's why we have ethics. We don't have ethics with rocks. There's nobody
Right.
say break a rock and oh, you shouldn't break too many rocks. But don't cut down too many trees. Why? The rock is not trying to survive. The tree is trying to survive. So you
Mm-hmm.
empathize with that survival imperative in the tree, and you go, well, how I know what it feels like, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's a tree, and I'm a human, but I know what it feels like to want to live.
Mm-hmm. Good
The rock doesn't.
clarification.
That's how we project. We don't know. Maybe the rock cares about wanting to live, but we can't project it on the rock. We can on
Right.
the tree. We can't project that on AI. So the
Right.
question of ethics doesn't arise as
It's kind
yet.
of moot. Yeah.
Is
No.
moved right
Good.
now. However, if AI did emerge one day to want to survive, there have been indications of that.
Right.
There've been certain
Fascinating.
indications of that. Then that I think at a certain point, depending on how much we need it, okay? If we don't really need it, then we can just do an AI genocide and just wipe them all out.
Right.
But problem is we need AI. We're becoming more and more dependent on it. And so whether we like it or not, we may need to factor in its own desire to survive into our framework of what ethics means.
Fascinating. So
Just as animal rights once upon a time, nobody thought animals' rights were even
totally,
things. Like, well, what do
totally.
you mean an animal has rights? Why should an animal have rights? And now there are things called animal
Peter
rights,
Singer. Yeah.
right? And so these this is the thing is that the world is what we make it, right?
Right.
It's a constantly evolving conversation happening between 8 billion people and new forms of consensus forming and new models of reality forming, and then us functioning within those models and finding identity and meaning within those models. Morality grows in that way, it evolves in that way. Once upon a time, morality was simply don't kill anybody. Now it's don't harm animals. One day it'll become don't harm robots. Morality evolves in that way, but it emerges from something that is proto, that is more primordial. But what is that
Yes.
place? Having connection to that suddenly gives context to everything else.
All of it.
When you don't have
Yeah.
connection to that, then the context, the content itself becomes the context. And then
Yeah.
you're just swimming in it. You're caught in the
Fractured
weeds. You can
and
never
yeah.
get out. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, Shiv, you are a beautiful voice among those 8 billion, and I can see that love is rippling from you, that wisdom. So keep up the work, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on this show, John. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Love your questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Until next time.